Welcome to the GovFresh Podcast.
Given that we're talking about human beings, I don't know that I would describe anything as an ideal. I would say there's a lot of room for variation with amazing potential and results. I think sometimes the right people are a combination of very different people that can lead to outcomes that are really powerful. And so I think it's more, there's a combination, a composite of people that are really powerful together that can really make a big difference. When you're talking about like civic hacking, it's a very narrow lane of communities interacting with government. And so I think it's, anyone with curiosity and a desire to improve their communities is a good starting point. Like that's a ground level, that's, table stakes. You've got to care about and want to improve your community. And it helps if you've got some clue about a direction or a need. And I think that then gets layered with, well, there's an element of this that may be about building new technology and maybe about analyzing data.
In this episode of the GovFresh Podcast, Steve Spiker, better known as Spike, talks with us about his work in civic hacking, including co-founding OpenOakland, which served as the Code for America Brigade in Oakland, California. He shares his thoughts on why civic hacking is important in a healthy digital democracy and how hackers and government can show up and effectively work together. Spike shares a thoughtful retrospective on his time pioneering and actively civic hacking, organizing civic hackers, and how grassroots technologists can continue to leverage their passion and skills to impact civil society. So let's start off with the big question. What is civic hacking to you?
Yeah, the term got used to describe an awful lot of things, and I think the idea that resonated most with me was a definition that Mark Head, who's the first chief data officer with the city of Philadelphia, his definition was the idea that people feel like they are equipped to use the skills, whether that be technology or design or advocacy skills, the skills they have to improve their cities for the better for all. So that was the idea that sort of to me made the most sense. Like it wasn't just about messing with tech or just about open source. It was using those tools, some of those ideas to improve your city for the people that live in your city. That was the concept that resonated the best with me through my years.
Mm-hmm. And would you say that sort of folks that are, quote, outside of government, is there a difference between civic hacking if you're inside government and outside government, or do you feel like it applies to everyone?
Yeah, I mean, it was certainly defined with an outside perspective. Like this is a chance, that was certainly with OpenOakland. Like it was this opportunity for people outside of city power structures and jobs to be able to influence how their city operated and functioned and how they interacted with it. And so it was certainly geared towards the external. But it seemed a lot of the ideas and certainly a lot of the approaches have been adopted internally as well. And so I think it's valid to consider it from if you're in Civic Hall, if you were going to, take a very lightweight approach to doing things and do deep user research and, consider innovative ways to move fast. Like you can certainly argue that is a form of civic hacking, but I think its truest form, like it's for people outside the government power structures, giving them a chance to actually hack at government and how they interact with government as well. So it's an outsider's game, but it also relies on inside participation and support. Otherwise, it's throwing us off at a very big, strong brick wall that doesn't budge.
Mm-hmm. And, I think a lot of people perceive hacking or hackers in a negative connotation, and maybe even civic hackers too. I think there's probably a case to be made that, sometimes civic hackers are, not the greatest to work with. But I think it depends on the culture and the political environment of the location. How would you say the ideal civic hacker would show up?
Yeah, it's a fun question. I mean, yeah, your mileage may vary. There are savior complexes and there's arrogance everywhere, right? And so,
Mhm.
yeah, I don't know that I would describe, given that we're talking about human beings, I don't know that I would describe anything as an ideal. I would say
Mhm.
there's a lot of room for variation with amazing potential and results. I think sometimes the right people are a combination of very different people,
Mhm.
um, that can lead to outcomes that are really powerful. And so I think it's more, there's a combination, a composite of people that are really powerful together that can really
Mhm.
make a big difference. When you're talking about like civic hacking, it's a very narrow lane of communities interacting with government. And so I think it's, anyone with curiosity and a desire to improve their communities is a good starting point. Like that's a ground level,
Mhm.
that's, table stakes. You've got
Mhm.
to care about and want to improve your community. And it helps if you've got some clue about a direction or a need. And I think that then gets layered with, well, there's an element of this that may be about building new technology and maybe about analyzing data. And so those can be different skill sets that people bring to the table depending on the problem. And we often found that people that can write about the work and the need for it, the impact of it, were really important layers. Without being able to tell a story, did it really happen? So being able to communicate and write, but then being able to listen really well,
Mhm.
is a key element of this. Otherwise, arrogance takes over and you presume a lot. Savior complex is hard to rein in if you're not listening and hearing people. It's very hard to do this work humbly otherwise. And so
Yeah.
those are sort of skill sets that people have in different quantities. And so there's normally a technical layer to it, but often the advocacy layer and the partnering layer can be more important than whatever tech pieces need to get built or whatever data gets analyzed. It's what do you do with that then that really matters. And so people that can actually implement and partner well and collaborate well are important. But then also not losing track of who else is not at the table is sort of an important skill set that we certainly didn't focus on very well back in early stages of the concept of civic hacking. There
Mhm.
wasn't enough thought about inclusion and where the power wasn't being made available.
Mhm.
And I think that's an equation that is being pushed on a lot the last few years: is who's not there, how are people represented, and what voices are at the table, and then what are the ultimate impacts, or what are you really going to solve by doing the work. And so that humility layer, I think, is really important. Like it's always a bad thing when you come in with a big ego. Like that's not the ideal person, honestly. Coming in with humility that there's probably a thing that can be solved working together or just working outside and struggling on issues. But the humility layer can be important, and until it becomes like a very traditional sort of advocacy work where you've got to push against existing power structures. At that point, humility is nice, but you need to be loud and proud at that point, like that there's something wrong and it needs fixing. And so different characteristics become important at that stage.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I love that foundation, showing up with the intent, having an intention that's bigger than you, but also starting with humility. And then if that doesn't work, then moving on to something that's a little bit more, um, I don't want to say aggressive, but, um, you know, working beyond the confines of a, respectable, what we would consider a respectable exchange. And a lot of times I hear civic hackers have the intention of, they show up with humility, and government officials just don't want to deal with them and cause problems for them, and in some cases are, you know issue, retribution. And but if you are showing up with that foundation with intent to build a better community, and the uh, public officials aren't willing to engage, then you still want to execute on that. You just have to do it in a different way. Um, but I think starting, like you said, starting with that foundational intent and humility is very important. Because I think there are a lot of people who think that hackers just show up with arrogance. They're smarter than everybody else, and they're going to build something and listen to us, and and deploy the thing that we've built, or you're stupid.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's it's a big tent because it sort of butts up against like traditional advocacy and base building, because there are many issues that, frankly, building tech and being nice partners isn't the way to get things done. And
Mhm.
so, it's not, there's not one solution fits every problem
Yeah.
in community. And so there's a need for, advocacy that's data informed, that, understands technology, that is far more aggressive and loud and more traditional base building work than civic tech, which was more of a like, how do you partner with government, which was, honestly, coming out of the advocacy world, the Code for America approach of like going inside and partnering and being an ally
Mhm.
was really interesting and intriguing, because it gave you access to power and the ability to influence systems in a different way that you don't always get with external, you know, loud, traditional democracy based, advocacy work. And so it was intriguing because there were settings where you could change things that wouldn't otherwise be changed. And often it was on the implementation side of things that where
Mhm.
things often fell up. Like you maybe had a half decent policy, but the implementation was just garbage, and therefore the people in the community weren't served or weren't given equitable access to supports and services. And so implementation failed a lot in government. And so that CFA model of like, we'll get inside, work with people, become trusted partners, and make the implementation work. And then, also considering, equity in implementation as well as a layer that wasn't really focused on enough early on.
Mhm.
That's a different model, right? And I think it's a yes and. I don't think either of those are exclusive. I think that they're really important in a healthy society, that both those things exist, where you can have avenues to work on the inside, improve in implementation, create structures for innovation in government that is both safe to innovate and fail, and also that doesn't cause harm when you innovate and fail. That's really important, as well as the data backed community power that traditionally happens in American cities and rural areas. So I think that it's an important layer. I don't think
Mhm.
it's a standalone layer on its own. Like, it often leads into, well, this is an issue we've highlighted with data or product now. Who does something about it, right? That's often at the next step. Well, it goes back to traditional advocacy work and organizations that have formed to represent the needs of working families and the poor in the US. So it's a really important layer, but it's not a solution on its own for most things.
Yeah, I want to put a pin in the brigade stuff and the Code for America role in all of the and civic hacking, because I think that with the changes that have happened, it's important to kind of retrospect that a little bit, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. But kind of touching on your uh, history with civic hacking, and you founded Open Oakland. Wait, when did you found Open Oakland?
It was 2012, I think.
Okay, so you're kind of an OG civic hacker. Your Open Oakland was one of the first Code for America brigades, correct?
Yeah, I think there was one or two that had formed, and Eddie and I were sort of contemplating this new thing we were going to make.
Hmm.
Um, and it made sense to sort of jump into the brigade world as well. Like, we certainly considered, like, do we just do our own thing? But there seemed like there were some advantages, again, like that, building that inside trust lane
Hmm.
felt like that was an angle that we wanted to work on, because I was working on the outside mostly in
Hmm.
Oakland, and there were lots of things that were subpar in city government as far as technology implementation and data availability, transparency. Like, those things weren't good. And so I felt like the approach of taking a, let's partner with CFA in this brigade model, and that'll open up some doors that would have been very, very hard and slow to open otherwise, was sort of the play there. Is that we figured that there were things that could get done by being a partner that couldn't get done by being a loud outside facing or inside facing organization from the outside trying to push things. Both were needed, right? And so
Hmm.
the work I was doing at Urban Strategies Council was based outside, focusing on pushing change inside. And it was hard and slow sometimes. And so this was a play to, work with folks inside and see what opportunities there were to push for change in a side by side model rather than an antagonist model. Although we certainly were seen by plenty as antagonistic, because we were saying things and talking in ways that weren't comfortable inside government all the time. But
Yeah.
I think that was, being honest about that, and bringing truth to power is important, to not just throw everything under the bus for the cost of partnership and getting inside. That's not that's not a play that I was willing to make. But it certainly
Yeah.
happened in other places.
Yeah, I mean, I think that gets back to your initial point, right? Like everybody has kind of the same intentions. People are just coming at it from different perspectives and information, and even like having sort of preconceived notions about the other, right? And I think that starting to congregate together and work with one another, those things start to dissipate, which I want to talk about also. But I love origin stories. And I know you just mentioned a little bit about it, but can you just kind of talk about Open Oakland, how Open Oakland started, and then how it evolved over, the years and even where it is today?
Yeah, I'll leave where it is today to the folks that lead it now. It's no longer my puppy, so
Mm-hmm.
it's other people's work and mission now. So I'll leave that mostly to them for the future. But yeah, at the starting point, so Eddie
Eddie?
Tejera and I were connected as part of Code for America's fellowship program.
Uh-huh.
And I was meant to be mentoring him, and frankly, it was more the opposite way. It was a very healthy mutual relationship where we both learned from each other and pushed each other a lot. It was great. Um, and we kept butting up against, like, there's these broken systems inside the city, or they're publishing no data, or there's garbage data, and it's not helpful. And advocates need better access to information. There's massive transparency issues. Things are done in very closed door settings, and then by the time advocates learn about it, it's too late to influence change. There were so many layers where the city wasn't functioning honestly or transparently or effectively, on a process issue, on a data issue. And certainly that was the city was, city OPD in particular was spending enormous amounts of money on technology and getting very poor outcomes from that. And that was really frustrating. And so we felt like there was an opportunity to demonstrate and it was very intentional, what a much safer form of civic tech advocacy could bring, by being a setting in which city folks could come to the table, bring an issue, bring a problem, and work with people without being judged or drawn up in the press as, like, this is a failing in City Hall, or this is not what we wanted. Giving people a safe setting to explore and try to make things better,
Mm-hmm.
and bring some of the know-how from the folks in the community, Oaklanders who are great designers, or great user experience people, or who know how to write and build technology that actually meets people's needs and works for people well. And so we felt like there were all these assets in the community. And this was a little bit of building on sort of Tim O'Reilly's sort of long tail of government. Like, there are all these people in the community that know many things, and they're not really able to sort of bring that to bear on making the city a better place. And so,
Mm-hmm.
how do you take the tech design, back end infrastructure capacity that people have by working in these amazing new startups in the Bay Area, and how do you create a venue where they can apply some of those skills in a setting in local government, which often struggles with finding cutting edge technology talent and retaining it, and that is generally repressive for tech innovation and experimenting. So how do you make a safe place for people to try and fail? There's a comma in there, try and fail
Mm-hmm.
sometimes. And then there was certainly a need we thought, to push harder on things like open data, considering use of open source technology in government to be a more effective way to use taxpayer dollars. So we thought there were multiple issues that were frustrating, and there were skills within people in the community, and we wanted to put those two things together. So, when we opened the table and said to folks, like, this is what we're thinking, there was a lot of interest, and some of the folks early on, you wanted a more radical sort of activist, antagonistic organization, and I got that for sure. Like that, I felt that urge also. But the intent was that we would be a supportive partner. We wouldn't pull punches,
Mm-hmm.
but we would work as a supportive partner rather than an antagonist. And some of the folks, broke off early days and became much more loud and more connected activist organizations, and that's great, right? That is a healthy thing where there are those options for people that want to be louder, more active. I through my years, I did some work with some far more activist, heavy organizations, because I had that urge. I wanted to be more sort of on the coal face of activism work, and
Mm-hmm.
I just did that with other organizations because Open Oakland wasn't it, and Open Strategies Council wasn't necessarily the place to do all those things. And so, it was a bunch of people who wanted to make a difference essentially, and didn't feel like there was another mechanism where they could influence that change. There were certainly people that just wanted to hack on shit, build stuff, mess with data, and that's great, right? Like that's fun, and there should be a place for that in society, and that's okay. And we sort of gave people space for that too, whilst trying to channel them into working on things that would matter in their community. So there was a lot of focus on community building through the work. And yeah, and it was interesting because city folks, we saw this change over the years where we were this very, very unsafe, very risque bunch of hackers, right? Was how we were perceived, through to the point where, like, Libby Schaff, who was then a councilwoman and then became mayor, would show up on a Tuesday night because we moved to City Hall to do the hack nights. She would show up every couple of weeks and talk with folks about what's going on, and it became much more we're in City Hall, we're not these crazy outsiders, and it was a bit more of a safe place for people to come with problems and talk about ideas. And so that became really healthy. And I think the thing that at the time, I think the thing we missed in the fervor over being seen as maybe this new trusted technology layer in the community, in the city, that folks would come to, and that we could work on and create technology solutions and data solutions to real problems, is that we forgot about what it meant for inclusion and equity across the city. We were based in City Hall, and that a lot of folks in the community don't trust the city, and with good reason.
Mm-hmm.
And that venue wasn't seen as a place that some people wanted to come and work, right? And we weren't easily accessible to folks in East Oakland. Transit's not the best, and so it wasn't as accessible by unintentional design, but that's still an outcome, right? It wasn't a very accessible organization. And so we didn't think enough early on about what it meant to fully represent the city, not just a bunch of middle class sort of tech employees that can get to City Hall pretty easily and feel comfortable doing so. We hadn't thought about that enough, and which was a failing, because we in my other work, that was a core to what we were doing, but it didn't translate into this setting. We sort of got carried away with the, like, people want to actually talk to us in City Hall, and people want to come to events and learn about doing things better, and that was the focus. And it wasn't holistic enough in hindsight. That was an area where we sort of slipped. And I think a lot of the brigades also, it wasn't part of the the manifest, and it wasn't done well in most places. But we certainly should have done better with that in Oakland for sure.
Yeah, I remember going over there and visiting, a few times, and seeing hackers inside City Hall, and it was definitely a surreal experience. Just like the two didn't. It was an odd juxtaposition. In some ways, it was awkward, but in other ways, it just felt really amazing that City Hall would let non-government officials who looked nothing like them, and were working on, technical things, literally open the doors to them and let them hack away in City Hall. So it was always kind of weird to see those two together, civic hackers or hackers in these kind of big open wooden walled rooms, was pretty wild. So I think that one of the things that would be important to understand, I think people look at civic hacking, and even in the civic tech community, but also government in general, is like, what's the point? Like, why is this important? It's not, building a product. It's not focused. It's unstructured. Why is it so important? I just want to take a moment to kind of understand or hear from you, why is civic hacking important, and what role does it play in building better civics or better government?
Yeah, I think it's important. I mean, one, I think there's always going to be a limit to how many people government can hire and the skills they'll have. Mm-hmm. And so I think on one level, it's important because it is a way to tap into and build on the skills and experience and interest that exist in a community, that you'd never be able to sort of hire that many people with that varied skill sets inside a government. And so it's a way to leverage the capacity that exists in our communities, and that's a huge thing. Like, as it's you can build tools that you think are fun in your private time, and that's great as a hobby. But if you can actually contribute to making a public service more accessible to people that need it, that's an amazing thing to be able to offer, with your skills, and a way to sort of add benefit and extra value and impact to local government. So I think it builds on the capacities we have is important. I think it is in a country that's ridiculously partisan or bipartisan, and has a growing contempt for government. And I'm certainly a cynic, my wife would say, and I think there are many failings in government through the last few hundred years, some pretty bad ones. But at the same time, like, I don't, this animosity towards local government officials, certainly in the last couple of years. I mean, when we started OpenOakland, there was animosity towards local government, right? That existed. It was a real thing. I mean, the intensity of it now, and the hatred and the distrust of local government officials, is just off the chain. Like, it's wild the way people talk about government officials and the threats and the hate. Like, so it's not new, but the scale of it now is horrendous. And so I think that it's important to give people on the outside a chance to work with people in government healthily and effectively, but it's also a chance to sort of honor and respect the work that is being done and attempted inside local government. Like, it's a venue where you can, when we did these Oakland Answers events, which were basically like a day of co-writing content for government websites that would be more accessible to people who needed it. It was a really good opportunity for people to like see that this person works in the library system or in records, and they know that the website sucks and it's not easy for people, and they want it to be better. And it's a chance to actually work with people inside government in a peer setting, in a collaborative way. And I think that's a really powerful thing to experience, because it takes away this othering of like, well, government is them. That's bullshit. Government is not them and us. Government is people who live in communities, work in communities, and have jobs that have responsibilities that mean they are on the front line of a lot of services and supports that need to exist in society. They're not some other. And so creating that dynamic where we're able to work together and see each other as peers, see people on the outside not just as clients or constituents, but people who have valid input and ideas that actually can make government function better. Like, I think that's a really powerful thing for people to experience. And then the hacking side of it, I mean, it's, when you've got big entrenched systems, when you've got things that are like built by policies that are very extensive and expensive in creating, they take time and effort, and they're hard to change. I think having people able to innovate and create on the outsides of that, on the implementation, is really important, because it's hard to change a policy. It's much easier to tinker around the extremes on that, the implementation side, and look at how it could be better done, how it could be better implemented. What are the outcomes? Honestly question that with better data, so that when there's more data out there for advocates to be able to use, you can make a better case that this program isn't working and needs to get reformed, or this program is producing harmful outcomes and needs to be stopped. Right? That's a really big power thing. And so I think that the power layer of pushing for open data and more transparency in process benefits everyone in society, maybe except the rich who traditionally have power. I think it benefits everyone else greatly to have more people having access to data that speaks to what government is doing and the outcomes that are a result of government's work.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I think that the personal dynamics, are really important. And you mentioned Libby Schaff, who was the mayor of Oakland. She would stop by on the hack nights, but there's also kind of the bigger events are related to the hackathons, and I think eventually they grew to be kind of National Day of Civic Hacking, but you would have more hackathons, which were more open to the community. They were also in City Hall. But can you talk about, and I think that those were important because they brought the community together as a whole, and they were much more of a community event and not just about hacking. But OpenOakland certainly facilitated that. Can you talk about what was the format when you would do your hack nights. I think they were like every week for a few hours. Can you talk about how that was organized, how that was structured, and then also how you organized the hackathons that were, I don't know if they were, I can't remember if they were annually or quarterly or what, but the idea of sort of bringing people together both in the civic hackers and then the broader community. Can you share how y'all did that?
Yeah, that's going back now, isn't it? So we tried to balance when we created those venues. We tried to balance them being a place where people could come and bring any ideas they had and try and build a team to work on those ideas. With the reality that like some ideas are pretty frivolous, right? Some ideas are very petty and personal, and they don't have a lot of civic good built into them. But giving people a space to, raise an idea and say, I want to do this thing, and, seeing if they can get interest in that, it's an interesting form of democracy where like people can opt into like, I'm not interested in that idea. That sounds like a gentrifier's logic mindset, and I don't want to be part of that. Or, that sounds like something that my community could use, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it gave people, the agency to, get involved. It was certainly, I think we did a pretty good job of both marketing them and running them as a venue where you didn't just need to be a technologist to be part of it. There were people that did process design and, were communications people and politics. Like, so the range of people and the skills they brought and experiences were good. Like, it was a really good mix of both diversity of people and diversity of skill sets. And so it meant that some of the ideas that got raised, there was a really good combination of people that could actually bring to bear different experience and perspectives and question some of those things. And so, we wanted to spark ideas and to probe at like what could be done better. Some of them we definitely had a big focus on, like just munging on open data and what can the data be used for and tell us and inform differently. But there was we over time, when we built some trust, it became more and more important that there were not just ideas coming from community side of things, but also ideas being raised by government staff at those events as well. And so that was important, that both through the city camp mechanism with those on conferences and then into the hacking spaces, it was a big focus for us. Like, how do you create a venue which is safe for a government official to come into you and say, hey, we have this data set, we have this issue, like what could how do we make this better, or how do we make this more accessible? And so building that reputation of trust and a space where people can come with an idea and not be criticized, not run the risk of like, pissing off city council because they weren't authorized to do this thing, became a really interesting venue to try things and experiment. And some of the ideas people brought never went anywhere. There was just no interest in it, there was a little bit of a problem that grew out of some of CFA's work was that there became this mindset that like City Hall could just leverage volunteers for free shit, right? And that was unhealthy and disrespectful. And so, we had to push back on that a bit, is that just because you have this desire and no funding doesn't mean someone's going to build it for free for you. And nor does it even mean that it's the best, healthiest way for something to exist. Sometimes having a volunteer build something on the side and maintain it in their time is an atrocious way to get something done that government should do itself properly with funding. And so, it gave us an opportunity in that setting to hopefully educate and think with people about like, what does sustainable technology look like, and what are ways to implement something that is reliable and stable. We certainly built some projects with volunteers that were really cool and had a good impact, but they got people lost interest over a couple of years. But government doesn't move at the pace of hackers, right? Government is slow to innovate and change, and that's fine because government's always got to be there. And you may move to Seattle, you may move to Atlanta, and have no interest in sustaining this project you built with a government agency, but that government agency didn't go anywhere. Like, it can't up and leave when housing's expensive. And so the stability of certain technology layers is really important in government. And so it was important to be able to give counsel to people about like, this is the problem you have that needs to be solved with maybe a creative approach to procurement and the technology layer, but it isn't something that's going to be sustainable with a bunch of people in their evening hours out of their passion and desire to see this thing through, right? So balancing where a thing needed to become a contract with someone or a firm to sustain was also an important sort of learning lesson, both for us and our partners inside City Hall.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. um, and doing all that, how many people would you say would show up to the hack nights?
Yeah, the weekly Tuesday nights in City Hall. I mean, there'd be nights where there'd be like, just 15 people. There'd be nights where there'd be 40 people. So I think we're
Mhm.
averaging in the low mid 20s most of the time. So it was a pretty healthy group, a good mix of skill sets. And yeah.
Yeah. So when you were quote organizing them, how did you recruit people, and how did you organize and manage them?
Yeah, recruiting. I mean, it was mostly digital. We did a couple of um, meet and greets at local organizations to tell them about the work we were doing and what it was and the impact and the possibilities, and to try and get people interested. So we did a few of those, Eddie and myself. Mostly it was just online, telling people about it. Talking to local press for sure was
Mhm.
important. Building some relationships there, so that when we did something, people would hear about it and learn about it beyond our, the small niche that we were. So the press was important as far as building awareness about it, and then connecting into other advocacy groups and technology hacker groups as well, to build the word. How we organized, so we built out a leadership team. Initially, there was a smaller group of people that sort of started it, and asked them to take on certain responsibilities as far as guiding new people into different. There were teams essentially working on different projects, and so we would structure the night so that it was time to sort of intro and learn who's there and what their interests were. If they had project ideas to talk through, we built a process for submitting ideas, so it wasn't because we'd have people come that were very eager. Sometimes they were problematic, but
Mhm.
people come with a lot of excitement and like spend 10 minutes sucking up the oxygen in the room with this
Mhm.
idea of theirs that was going nowhere, that had no chance of success. It was very personal or petty, and
Mhm.
it wasn't. We felt like that was disrespectful to people's time, and so we created a process. So if you wanted to bring this new idea, you had to submit it ahead of time and say, like, I think I've got this idea. There's this need. This is what I think could be done about it, and we would vet that. Briefly. It wasn't huge. It wasn't a heavy duty process, but it meant that we weren't wasting everyone's time with like someone ranting on about this thing they cared about, and everyone had to just sit and wait for this person to finish talking about it, and then there was no clear idea for a project. And so we sort of played a bit of a guiding role in helping people shape, like, you have this idea, this issue, like, is this a thing that we see could be worked on by volunteers in this setting in a way that's respectful and impactful? And some things just didn't. They just weren't there. Some things were petty, and we said, this doesn't make sense for us. And some things were things that city needed to do itself. So it was, that was a good learning process, but putting that guiding filtering layer on so that we use people's time well, and we didn't give people a chance. It wasn't a ranting platform, and what wasn't the point of it. So and then over time we built out a more intentional leadership team that had more formal responsibilities, whether it's marketing on community partnerships, or new member support, things like that. And so we worked on this process with Nicole Sanchez, um, who runs
Mhm.
Via Consulting, or did at the time, to help us build out like a really diverse leadership team. We sort of went through a double blind process to recruit people, and we ended up with a really amazing team of people that did very different roles. Some of those roles were natural and easy to succeed in, and some of them people struggled. Like, this was a new organization; it wasn't a traditional organization, didn't fit it wasn't a pure advocacy, it wasn't a pure tech organization. It was certainly hard to fundraise for. But some of the roles were formative, and people struggled a little bit in those roles to succeed because there was too much that was unknown or new. And so, but across the board, that team was fantastic. And when Eddie and I burnt out over time and stepped away, like we felt good being able to leave the organization in the hands of people that cared about it, shared the same values largely, and were committed to the work. So that was good, fortunate that we, did that work. We could have, kept on to power and been there. Like, it's all about us and it's our thing. But, we built this sort of model where power was shared and there were more people leading than just us. And that meant that when we did need to leave, Eddie for work stuff and me with, having more kids and life got too crazy,
Yeah.
the organization, was able to sustain beyond us. And it's changed and adapted since then, because it's now no longer our thing, it's theirs. And so they get to shape it and make it what they want it to be now, which is an awesome thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a whole thread to, pull on the sustainability of civic hacking or civic hacking organizations like OpenOakland or the Brigades, which, is currently kind of playing out.
Yep.
And so just kind of riffing on what you were talking about with, how you dealt with civic hackers within the hack nights. How did you onboard civic hackers into working with government officials, or maybe you didn't? I guess, what would be your advice to civic hackers working with government officials, or how did you kind of onboard folks to get their minds right and showing up with humility and working, giving government officials the benefit of the doubt in the beginning, and not being adversarial? What's your advice for hackers who are going to be working with government officials inevitably, hopefully?
Yeah. I think it depends on your entry point. Like, are you coming at this with, I have skills and expertise and I want to do something good in my community? Like, if you're coming at it with that perspective, then you can go through existing civic tech organizations and volunteer. Like, I work now for 1 Degree. We're a social impact nonprofit. We run a community resource directory in a bunch of different cities. And, and we work with volunteers sometimes, and, it's a civic tech organization for sure. And you can apply your skills in those settings. But if you, want to work on something with government, it's a little bit hard to find an entry point generally. And so that's where, organizations like the Brigades and others are important, because they provide a place where you, with your skills and interest, can connect with people who have, real problems either in the community or in government. Mm-hmm. And so I think it's important to think of this space as, you can apply your interest and passion to things that are government problems on the inside. You can also apply those to things that are community-facing problems on the outside, whether it's an advocacy organization, base building work. Like, those organizations have needs. They need data analyzed. They need products built to display, to illuminate local issues. So I think we've often seen it as like you've got to do things with and facing into government. But I think it's also valid to look at, you can apply those same skills at organizations that are doing work on the outside as well. So that's one thing. I think if you have a skill set that is design or writing or communications, those things as well, like, it's hard to individually plug into government because it's such a big obtuse thing, and it doesn't generally have a lot of volunteer opportunities that aren't full-time roles and interns. And so finding local organizations that do work that you share values with, I think, is the best way to do it. If it's a local nonprofit, if it's a local nonprofit research organization or data shop, or an advocacy focused base building group, like, those groups do need support as well. And sometimes it's technology, sometimes it's funding, sometimes it's marketing. And so I think there are many organizations that people can plug into locally. And then there is the Brigade work as well, and other civic tech organizations where it's more volunteer heavy. And those, you can come to with humility and say, like, I have this skill set, I'm interested in helping, and figure out what's on the table that you could contribute to. So I think there are many entry points into this space. I think the Brigade model was a good one, and now that's fracturing a little bit. But there's still, those organizations are great because there's a community there, and there's sort of guided projects that you can plug into. But there's definitely many layers of tech society, civic tech society, that folks can connect to on the outside. There's so many .orgs in every city that need some form of support. So there's projects available anywhere you look, essentially.
Yeah, and just kind of flipping that, what would you say were the common misperceptions that government officials had about OpenOakland or civic hackers or civic hacking?
Yeah, I mean, the first one is that they could just come and get stuff done for free, right? That was the first problem, is that it's not, that's, disrespectful and presumptive to the nth degree. So that was a thing we struggle with a lot, is communicating that this isn't just come and get free help. It was also that, like, balancing this idea that, like, you are the subject matter expertise in your area if you're inside of government, but that doesn't mean that yours is the only experience that matters. And so being able to ensure that people on both sides would listen well, like the government folks would listen to what they're hearing from user research and feedback in the community, was also as important as having technologists listen to what government staff are saying about what the problems are. So it was often a mistake that like either side believed they understood the problem completely, and generally neither side did completely. And so being able to form sort of a more complete picture of the problem in the space was really important. There were certainly issues around sustainability, right? Like, will someone want to do this project and keep it going for the length of time the government needs it? Was a big perception issue.
Mm-hmm.
And we were bouncing around this idea with city staff around like creating like a pre-approved contractor pool through OpenOakland, that like if government wanted a technologist to work on a problem, they could simply have a pre-approved, like it would function as a collective or co-op where there were people in the organization that had certain skill sets that government could sort of pick from in a very agile manner when there were small projects that came up that didn't justify like a 6-month RFP process. So we thought that would have been an interesting way to deal with some of those issues of procurement and skill set mismatch. Yeah.
Yeah. Now, what would you recommend to government folks who don't know how to engage with civic hackers? What would you recommend to them, and how they should engage with civic hackers, or even be proactive in engaging with civic hackers? What's your recommendation?
Yeah. It depends on your local ecosystem. Like if there is a civic tech organization or a brigade or something like that in your area, then I think it's, you've got a huge jump start because there's some capacity there locally that you can work with. And so in that situation, I definitely say to people inside government that like there is a very small risk in engaging with folks in the outside like this, but I think the opportunity, the potential is enormous in opening up your scope of who you could work with and what they could bring to the table. And so I think bringing ideas with enough detail of the problem and the context, so that people can then work creatively around them, I think is an amazing opportunity. And it's both, you might deliver, but you also might gain personally as well, as far as experience and perspective, how to work. I think the more you get exposed to user research, the more it changes your world.
Yeah.
It's about power and listening. And so I think that's always a powerful thing for government folks to be able to see differently and experience. And just being honest about what it is that needs to get done and how it will get sustained and what the goals are, what the impact goals are, I think is really important to think about ahead of time or early on. So that, it may be that what you get out of the engagement is advice on how to proceed formally with a contract, or what you get might be, community members wanting to work on this issue with you in a partnership. But definitely come to it with the idea that this is a partnership. This is not you dictating work, that this is you with a problem wanting some diverse perspective on how you might solve that problem. I think that's the healthiest way to come to the table.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's, and I think also, humility on both sides, right? At least being giving the benefit of the doubt, because it definitely seems like there's, the ecosystem it's ripe for friction from the beginning, and just coming into it with a little bit more openness. So we've talked about Code for America brigades, and for folks who don't know, you were active in the Code for America brigades through Open Oakland, but also the broader brigade ecosystem. For those who aren't familiar with that, can you just sort of give an overview of what that was, and even to what is where it is today?
Yeah, I think "was" is the right word.
Okay.
So it was conceived of as a mechanism to harness the potential in communities to change government to serve people more equitably and more effectively. And so it was the idea was that you could bring together people with open source technology skill sets and experience analyzing data, and apply have them work with people on the inside and solve problems, right? So how do you make the most of the skills in your community, and how do you help government change from the inside? was sort of the concept. And, and I think it varied all over. In every city that did this, it looked different. Some cities were much more like single issue focused, and others were like anything, let's do anything. And some were a little more advocacy leaning. And I think that was a really good, healthy mix. I certainly know that we locally struggled, and a lot of folks struggled with like, what is the organization model here?
Mm-hmm.
There was not a lot of clarity, honestly, about that in the first few years. Like it was a new thing, and that was cool, but there wasn't enough thought around community and power. There wasn't enough thought about sustainability of those organizations. What are the models, structures that needed to be in place to ensure that? And I think what you're seeing now with the the brigade network sort of being jettisoned, despite having a significant impact and being an amazing bunch of people that have done some great work, and certainly furthered Code for America's ideals over the years. I think that it's being forced to think about like what are the models that people want? What is this group of people doing? What structure do you need to further that work? And then how do you get support?
Mm-hmm.
I'm not excited about how it's gone down, but it's certainly, I think it's a useful evolution for the space to be folks to be, forced into how do we go forward? Who are we? What are we? Independent of Code for America. I think that's on one level, it's disappointing and frustrating, and on another level, it is a very reasonable thing for that work locally to move beyond Code for America, and for folks to what's happening is that folks are co-organizing and figuring out what is the structure they want and how do they work together. I'm part of some other national collaboratives that are more lightweight, open, sort of supportive collaboratives, and they're great models. But I think that I would love to have seen a lot more intentional support towards building those structures from CFA, but that's where we're at now. So
Yeah, I mean, that's a whole nother thread, right? Like what, the Code for America Brigades and the evolution of them and making them sustainable. And then Code for America's business model today and, trying to figure out how to make the organization sustainable. But, definitely the business model that it has at the moment, the brigade ecosystem isn't really supportive of that in the way that they're operating internally and in supporting governments. So I think you're right. Having the evolution of it is forcing the community, the hacking community, to think differently about civic hacking in a formalized structure like the Code for America Brigades. And I think it's an opportunity to just sort of be free of kind of the looming cloud of how do we make this sustainable? How do we, value these folks and bring value to government with them, and without it being a distraction or something ancillary. And just to be clear, Open Oakland was a Code for America brigade, but there were a lot of the traditional kind of, or the standard naming for the brigades was sort of Code for Tulsa, Code for San Francisco, right? Like most of them were kind of a code for whatever the city they were in. But Open Oakland was it an anomaly in its naming convention?
There was I mean, this is one of the things, like Code for America wasn't first to the table, right? So
Right.
there was Open San Diego before there was Code for America. There were a couple of other, there's Open Plans. There were some great organizations that were focused on the open concept in different ways. And so we felt more affinity to organizations that were, more about open data and open government. Was our real affinity base. We liked the concept of Code for Oakland. It was interesting. I had participated in leading an event called Code for Oakland, and so we'd already run an event that used that name. We felt like Open Oakland was more reflective of like what we wanted to build, rather than just Code for Oakland. And so, out of not wanting confusion over events versus organizations, and then it just felt a bit more like the model that we wanted to be, was Open Oakland.
Right. Yeah. And speaking of events, I'm remembering the City Camp Oakland and that event. And I think that that's sort of a amalgam of civic hacking and something broader. But that was always an event that was like, I just remember going to that and really getting an understanding of the community. A lot of different folks were involved. A lot of folks participated. There was high energy in that. It was really I think it was representative of the deeper work, the weekly hackathons and the community building that you would do. But also understanding that you needed to create a space for the community and government officials to kind of come in and do kind of hacking, whether it was technical or kind of getting together and ideating. But the event component, I think, is really important, and something that hopefully, as we get past the pandemic, we start to see more of the kind of hackathon or city camps that incorporate the civic hacking in with the in real life stuff to bring everybody together. So it feels more of like a real community. I just remember fondly kind of going to City Camp Oakland, and it was, I think you would open it up in City Hall and people would kind of give their pitches. It was just kind of amazing to see people talking on the dais at City Hall about civic hacking and what workshops were going on and who's doing what. It was pretty amazing. So I guess like the last question that I have for you, 2012, it's 11 years. You've started an organization, you kind of built it all out and made it to be sustainable. And it's, I know you don't want to talk about where it is now, and but it's still around in some shape or form. And you've seen a lot of what's happening with the Code for America Brigades and where that is now. If you, looking back at all of that, if you were to set up a civic hacking organization with what you knew today, whether it's a local based one or a Code for America Brigade type organization where it was an umbrella of something, like what would a civic hacking organization look like after all that you know today?
Yeah, I think in my last year leading OpenOakland, I came up with this sort of framework that would help me think about and communicate about what we're doing. And I think probably the biggest failure we had was not specializing. There were so many things that could be done that were interesting and exciting that could all have a different impact. And we were trying to do all four, maybe there's five. And so essentially, like these pillars of civic tech were like, well, there's apps, right? You can build apps. You can run events. You can do community building, and you can do advocacy. And each of those has a role, right? There's a layer where demonstrating tech potential and making things possible with technology is really important for change. There's a level at which City Camp and rethinking, reframing the government community interface is really important. And then there's community building amongst technologists and training people, building skill sets. That's really important too. And then there's like advocating for, we got open data law passed, and getting the civic infrastructure, which is the legal infrastructure, up to a modern standard. That's really important too. But honestly, doing all four, you're too fragmented. Like you're mentally in two different places. You are effective at some of those things because of your dynamics and your partnerships, and not at others. And so I think the biggest single thing is figuring out really early on what couple of those pillars are you going to focus on, because you won't be effective at advocacy and community building if you've got to build apps with government, which requires enormous amounts of trust and collaboration. If you're also on the outside trying to advocate for a lot of change, then you are playing the outside game and the inside game, and you are going to fail at one of those or both. And so being clear, like, are we an inside working with gently pushing and partnering and maybe doing city camps and civic hacking events? That's fair. But if you're wanting to be more of an advocacy organization, then that's going to put you at odds, and that's going to put you politically in tough spaces, because you are then, wanting to speak truth to power, but also wanting to work with those folks the next day. And that's a hard dynamic to balance. And so figuring out what you want to achieve, and honestly, like other organizations locally that are doing some of that you should just support instead of making your own thing. I think we made the right decision with starting something new, but there's certainly a lot of organizations doing a lot of good work on each of those 4 items, right? That you could say, we're going to, build a volunteer league for this local nonprofit that needs tech or data work, right? There are many ways to get involved and engaged that will have a big impact, that don't rely on you being a new thing. And it was fun because I told, Eddie, when we're talking a lot, and others, like the last thing Oakland needs is a new nonprofit, right? And then we made a new nonprofit because we felt like there was a unique niche there, right? But I don't think everywhere needs a new organization. Sometimes you just need to figure out how to coordinate and plug into existing efforts.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great point. I think it'll be like with the, as you said, the jettisoning of Code for America Brigades, it'll be interesting to see how folks who worked underneath those umbrellas or that structure will move to, bringing their interest and their skills to organizations that are already available. I think it's an opportunity for organizations to be more proactive in expressing their technical needs and drawing civic hackers into, their mission and supporting them. And I think, civic hackers there's a lot of civic hackers who would be interested in, quote, working for free in that dynamic because they see their work being delivered in a real way immediately.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of personal satisfaction from getting involved and contributing to this sort of work. I think that's huge, right? And people want to feel like their skills can be used in something that means something, and that's fantastic, right? People should encourage that. And there's millions of opportunities, honestly, to do that with the skills you've got, and that's awesome, right? That people can plug in and do that. And at the same time, it's good that there are coordinated efforts to align those skills and interest into projects that matter, provide people opportunities to do that well. Like that's important too. So it's not just a bunch of people building stuff for fun or for anger or frustration on the outside that just go nowhere. Like those things are always going to happen, and that's fine. But it's great that there is more civic infrastructure to put those skills to use in projects that will really matter and change things for better equity and justice in communities.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the GovFresh Podcast. Visit the GovFresh Podcast online at podcast.govfresh.com.